Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I hope all my wellness warriors are doing fabulous. And I hope you're having a great Wednesday, whether you're just getting started, not even rolled out of bed yet, or if you've been going for a while like I have. So if you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom. I'm a nana. I'm a girlfriend, jazzerciser, runner, grad school student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, former executive officer in the building industry for 21 years. And I'm also a part-time program director for my local NAMI Citrus. If you don't know what NAMI is, it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. That was weird the way I emphasized that word. In any case, I am a huge mental health wellness advocate because I have spent my life working, battling, depending on how you want to put it, with depression and anxiety. And I'll get more into that in a minute. So if you're just stumbling on my page, welcome. I started Wellness Wednesday because I believe peer support and sharing of information is huge for us to be able to move forward, to heal whatever our journey looks like. We can often learn from others, and that's why I started Wellness Wednesday. If you are a regular follower, you already know these things, and I hope you enjoyed last week's video on moving the needle forward on our dreams and goals. If you didn't see that, I will drop the link in the comments for this video when I'm done so that you can find it easily. But for right now, you can go back and find at least the last 30 days worth of videos on Facebook on my videos tab. So some quick housekeeping before I get started. Number one, as I've mentioned before, but if you're new to my page, you wouldn't know this. Facebook has decided to start eliminating or deleting live videos that are 30 days or more old. So they're giving me time to download old ones, which I'm almost done. And then anything new that has happened since February 19th is being automatically deleted in 30 days. So that's usually plenty of time for everybody to get a look at it. But if you're just stumbling on my page and you want to go back and watch old videos, stay tuned because as soon as I'm done downloading all of and that's, this is episode 130. So that's a lot of videos, in and around, in my spare time. So once I get all those downloaded, I already have some uploaded to a YouTube channel and I just need to finish that process. And then I'll start linking that channel so that you can follow it, so that if you do miss these on Facebook, they will be there for you to go back to when you are ready. Or if you have one that you especially loved, but you wanted to go back and listen again, because it was one that required a notebook and you couldn't take notes fast enough, those options will be there going forward, just in a different format. So, another thing, housekeeping wise, I just want to show you that I'm proudly wearing my NAMI Walks t-shirt that I earned from raising $100 or more for the local NAMI Walks. That was last Saturday. It was amazing. I've not seen anything like a NAMI Walks, and it was great. If you're like, oh crap, I wanted to go, or I wanted to donate, or whatever, it turns out that we can actually continue to take donations to the NAMI Citrus NAMI Walks for another 4 to 5 weeks, which means at least, good morning, Miss Amanda, which means at least until the end of the month, you can still donate. And I will drop that link in the comments too. If you didn't get a chance to come to the walk because you were out of town, or busy with something else, then there's still an opportunity for you to donate to support NAMI Citrus's free programs. And if you're like, Donna, I'm not in NAMI Citrus, I'm clear over here in New York, Wyoming, whatever, because quite a few of you that watch are, we would certainly welcome your support of the local NAMI. However, if you would prefer to support one closer to you, you can go to NAMI.org and locate an affiliate near you and find out what they're up to, see if they're having a walk, and find out how you can participate or donate that way. Or you can just donate to NAMI National. But obviously, I'm biased, and if you're able to, it was a wonderful walk, Amanda, and I'm sorry you missed it too, but I saw your post, and I know you were out having a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoyed your weekend, and we think the walk was a tremendous success, so hopefully the NAMI board will decide to do another one next year, so it's another opportunity. Which, Amanda, reminds me, if I didn't say so already, if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, hit hashtag replay in the comments, ask a question, drop a comment, whatever, so that I know you saw it, because Facebook doesn't always show me all the things while I'm on. So if I don't say hi to you or don't answer your question, It's not because I'm ignoring you. It's because I didn't see it. All right, so let's get started. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Part of the reason I'm wearing my awesome NAMI Walk shirt. And I want to kick it off by talking a little bit about why this is more than a movement and why it's so personal to me. Because again, one of the benefits of like peer support, sharing tips, learning from others is that we have to share our stories. And that's actually the theme of Mental Health Awareness Month from NAMI's angle is share your story. So I want to kick this off about why mental health is so personal for me. If you've been following me for a while, you know some bits and pieces, but maybe not all. And nobody will necessarily ever know all because some of those things, they don't really come to surface until something specific makes me think of them. Just recently, I stumbled on a memory I forgot I had. And not necessarily bad ones, but just things I don't always remember right away. So, I've lived with anxiety for as long as I can remember. And as a kid, I often felt unsafe or unheard. There were family patterns, things that were said or not said, behaviors that got passed down, and it all left a mark. It all leaves a mark. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. It's about healing and giving ourselves permission to grow beyond what has shaped us while we can still honor that journey and recognize that good, bad, or ugly, it has made us who we are and put us where we are today, which is more than likely some improved version of where we started. So every day, I hope that sharing my story reminds someone out there that they are not alone. So as always, let's start with some nerd facts because y'all know I love my nerd facts and I like to put a little science behind it so that you're not, a lot of what I talk about on Wellness Wednesday is based on my own personal experiences, my school studies. But I want you all to know that I'm not just pulling this stuff out of my ear, right? So while lived experience is super important and I have that, a little bit of nerd doesn't hurt either, right? So, according to NAMI, and most mental health agencies, 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience a mental illness each year. And yes, I have notes because I can't just recite this stuff off the top of my head. And let's be realistic, that's only what's reported. There are still a lot of people that do not report mental health struggles, issues, illness. And so that is probably a low number in reality. But 1 in 5 U.S. adults is enough to fill every NFL stadium more than 30 times. That's crazy, isn't it? That's huge. Those are huge numbers and not to be ignored. Anxiety disorders are the most common, affecting over 40 million adults every year. 19%, that's 19% of the population. That's according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Depression affects more than 21 million adults, and women are twice as likely to experience major depression. But again, think about the stigma that's always been attached with mental health, and know that that is probably a very underreported issue, especially in men, because the culture has been, until recently, and I think there's still some of it underlying, is that a manly man, a real man, doesn't show emotion, doesn't express emotion. He's strong, he muscles through, etc. So I really truly think that depression numbers are probably severely underreported, especially in men. So keep that in mind. That's so the 21 million adults with women twice as likely, that's according to the National Institute of Mental Health. NAMI says that less than half of the 1 in 5 U.S. adults will receive professional treatment. And the barriers that will keep them from receiving professional treatment are, number 1, stigma, cost, access barriers, which means they may be in areas that have limited access, because those still exist despite the advent of, huge leaps and bounds of technology, and fear of judgment, which is part of that stigma. We fear that if we speak about mental health struggles, that others are going to judge us. And with everything that's been going on with mental health, especially since 2020, I feel like that attitude should be different, but I see it. I see it in the number of people that just don't speak up and don't attend things and don't support things like NAMI walks because they're afraid. They don't want anybody to know they're associated with it. There's some other information and research that's going on in the county that indicates that quite a few people are probably struggling with mental health, but don't want anyone to know. So we also see there's a lot of ways that you can see that this still exists, not just in the county, but nationwide. Okay, 2 more nerd facts. Kind of 3. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for for people aged 10 to 34. And it's on the rise in adults over 65, especially men. And that's according to the CDC and to the National Institute of Mental Health. That's really scary. And it has the potential to be so preventable. In fact, NAMI has a free QPR, which is Question, Persuade, Refer, suicide prevention class coming up on May 16th. And I'll drop those details in the comments as well. There's a lot you can learn, and it's okay to have the conversation. You might save someone's life, as opposed to not having the conversation because you are afraid of putting ideas in someone's head. So the ideas are already there. If they're there, they're there, and it's not going to be because of you. Also, youth are in crisis. More than 60% of teens with major depression received no treatment in the last year, according to Mental Health America. And it's also important to know that even though they have found a genetic basis for a lot of mental illnesses, there are things that you can do that you have control of. When you have a genetic predisposition, we have a tendency to be like, oh, there's nothing we can do about it because it's genetic. And that's not necessarily true. While it may be something, if it's genetic, that we always have to live with, and often mental illness or mental health struggles are, there are things that we can do even when we're on medication to augment those treatments, augment the medication, and make our bodies and minds better, so that maybe our symptoms aren't as severe, or we can control them better. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So those are our nerd facts. So and this is just, I'm warning you, this is going to be a tiny bit longer today because of the content. But I'll give you an overview of my story if you haven't heard it before, if you've only heard bits and pieces. And I'll try to go through this. Like I said, sometimes I don't always remember all the things. So there's a lot more, and there's lots of little nitty gritty details, but we don't need all that, right? So my story and why this is so personal for me is that right around the time of my divorce in 2001, I was diagnosed with functional anxiety and depression that possibly dates back to the age of 3 or 4, around the time my parents got divorced. Please, please, please do not take that in any way to mean that I am blaming the divorce, because I'm not. I am very resilient. I'm well adjusted. I know plenty of children of divorce that are well adjusted, but there can sometimes be an impact, and sometimes that impact is determined by other factors besides just a triggering event. So we'll go there in a minute. So functional anxiety and depression. And the Reader's Digest condensed version of how this went down was that I went to we went to a marital counseling appointment, and the counselor looked at me and said, "How long have you been depressed?" And I looked at him like he had 10 heads and was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so he reframed the question, and he said, let me try this again a different way. He said, when was the last time that you remember being happy for more than 2 weeks that wasn't specific to an event in your life? And before he even finished the question, I started crying uncontrollably, because I knew he was right. Because I had always felt different. I had always felt excluded. I always felt weird. I always felt like there was something wrong with me, like I was wired differently. And I just thought it was part of my personality. Well, what happens when you have something that's lifelong or functional like that, where you can function through it, is you begin to feel as though it's part of your personality. And I truly did. I cried at the drop of a hat, especially something sad, especially around the holidays. It was just always there. It was just, I just assumed I was just wired that way. And it very well could have been. So that was my original diagnosis, was functional lifelong depression and anxiety. I've heard it called other things since then, like smiling depression. there's a lot of different ways it can be referred to, but it's been there for a very long time. And again, remember, anything I say is not to place blame. It's about awareness. It's about being aware that family behavior patterns can be passed down. Those are learned behaviors. There can be genetic and biological components of mental health, and environmental triggers, and seldom ever are these things all because of that one influence. They are often a combination of influences. So we also had a joke in the family about something we referred to as the granny gene, because my granny had the most, my understanding was, and the verbiage was, the worst clinical depression that her doctor had ever seen. And she also had severe agoraphobia, which was a fear of leaving the house, not being able to escape a bad situation. And I've touched briefly before on how she had a rack of meds on her bathroom door. And I had asked my grandmother one time what all those medications were for. My grandmother said they were all placebos, because my granny was also a clinical hypochondriac. They don't use that word anymore per se. There's a different term for it now. But basically, if she read about it, she had it. And in that day and age, doctors didn't try to treat the real problem, as much as they were just like, here's a sugar pill. She didn't know it was a sugar pill. Here's a pill that'll fix that. And a couple of days into the pill, she'd be fine. And she would move on to the next issue. So there was a family pattern there, and we joked about the granny gene. But as I got older and started experiencing my own anxiety, and then watching some things with my daughter when she was 4, like obsessing over a bun in her hair, the light bulb went on, and I was like, okay, this isn't a joke. There's something real going on here. Because of course my daughter grew up completely differently than I did. So in my mind, although granted she was probably emulating things she had seen me do at that point, but in my mind, she didn't have the experiences, and I was very environmentally focused at the time. She didn't have the experiences environmentally to have produced this kind of thing when she was 4. However, like I said, the light bulb went on, and it became apparent that, environmental or not, there was more to this granny gene than just a joke, and it was a real thing. And then I was petrified, because I didn't want to be the person with the rack of pills on the back of my door. So there was some generalization that went on in my head for years, that made me afraid to talk about mental health issues, right? So like I said, I always felt different, excluded, weird. I basically grew up believing that feelings were not okay, and that speaking them caused confrontation and trouble. That continued to have long-term impacts as an adult. And even now, if I have to sit down and have a talk with somebody about how I'm feeling, I get very shaky and very anxious, because there's still my body still responds as if it has to be a confrontational situation, when it rarely ever is. And we've talked a little bit about that before too. I was bullied as a child and as an adult. Yes, there are adult bullies, in case you didn't know that. I've had workplace bullies. I've had adult bullies that I've been in relationships with, and I was bullied as a child. And there's been repeated emotional, and I always say, and I actually put this down in my notes, just in parentheses or in quotations, repeated emotional and borderline physical abuse. And I will just tell you that I still sugarcoat this. There were some moments of actual physical abuse in my life. And there were even a couple of moments as an adult where I may have gotten a little handsy with somebody. But which is not okay in any way, shape, or form, even if it's retaliatory. And by retaliatory, I mean, if somebody punches you, obviously most of us, the inclination is to punch them back. But I'm talking about somebody, grabs my arm a little bit too hard and I start getting physical. That's not okay either. So I've had a couple of moments of my own physical response, if you will. But the reason I say I often sugarcoat this is because I say borderline abuse, because for years, I didn't want to actually say, yes, this incident or these 2 or 3 or this handful of incidents were abusive, and they were not okay, because I still sugarcoat. And I find myself, my boyfriend just called me out on this a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about something, and I was trying to explain the differences between perspective as a child and perspective as an adult. And part of that was the way I viewed something as a child versus now as an adult. I'm like, well, maybe this was going on and I just didn't know it. And he's like, you're doing it. You're sugarcoating it. You're minimizing it because I was often made to feel like I was the problem. So there's that's a huge, gigantic chunk of my history. Also, I was, and again, we won't get into all the nitty-gritty details for various reasons. There's no need to overshare. You get the drift. I was in and out of foster care. I was a ward of the county court. I ran away several times between the ages of like 11 and 14. And I also experienced some disordered eating as a teenager. While I never fell into a full-blown eating disorder, I did have that mentality. I had that anorexic mentality. I was terrified of gaining weight. I saw something different in the mirror than other people did. And I continued to see something different in the mirror, until probably my late 20s, early 30s. And sometimes it's still a struggle. But I'm no longer participating in the disordered eating. And I don't think I ever reached a full-blown eating disorder, but it was questionable there for a while. Of course, the severe social anxiety, which was my last biggest thing, severe social anxiety in my late 20s to late 30s, that it took me a while to recognize until I kind of had that meltdown episode in front of my daughter and a friend of hers, when I was freaking out about a bonfire down the street and literally pacing in circles in 3 layers of clothing, in the foyer of her friend's house, foyer, whatever. So those are like the highlights of my experiences. In between there's been some pretty significant depression, although it has been a long time since I've experienced depression. And the point here is that I've done the work. I've done therapy. I've done the education. I'm doing the education now. And there's a continued path of self-awareness that helps me to learn new things about myself and about some of these other things every single day. And that's why it matters now, because I'm learning. And even though it's daily practice, it is daily practice, and I still catch myself in old thought loops, and I've talked about that before, and that's okay. But it does get easier. The more we work on it, the easier it gets. And what I mean by that is, when I find myself experiencing that social anxiety or slipping into that depression, and I do still, and I think part of the reason that I can say that I haven't had a serious depression in a very long time, is because I can usually catch it as I'm getting closer to that big black hole. And I'm very, very grateful to God that I am now able to see when I'm getting there, and I can pull myself back from the edge before I fall in most of the time. Now, after my last school break, my boyfriend had a medical procedure, which kind of shook us up for a bit. And I was finishing a very tough school term. I think, have what I realized I had what I've described before as a post-event depression. There was just so much going on for so long that when the adrenaline finally, I couldn't get out of bed. I was struggling. I was sleeping a lot more than usual. I was struggling to get out of bed. I was struggling with motivation. I had a laundry list of things I wanted to get done on my school break. I barely touched any of them. So there was a short, temporary kind of post-event depression happening there that was likely just a result of go, not being able to feel emotions, express emotions, or just kind of stew and marinate in it. So I did that for a couple of weeks. So the point here is that this is why it's called recovery and not recovered. Similar to substance abuse, alcoholism, most of those people you will never hear say that they are recovered. And that's because you can't truly be recovered until you don't experience it anymore. You can kind of laugh in the face of it. Whereas an alcoholic most of the time still avoids a bar because they struggle with that temptation. So this is something that is recovery, not recovered. So I advocate because I know the signs, and that there's still a whole heck of a lot of us that aren't talking because we don't want to admit to ourselves we're struggling. A lot of times it's a pride thing, or because we're afraid others are going to judge us, or look at us differently. There's still a whole lot of us not talking, and that adds to the stigma and to the silence. And that's part of the reason why advocacy and sharing our stories and sharing my story is so stinking important, because it gives others courage to share theirs or change theirs or both. So you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. That's the bottom line. And until I understood that this was not a part of my personality and not something I had to accept and something that I could work actively to change, is there some hereditary factors in my history? Abso-freaking-lutely. There is rampant anxiety in my family. I love them all, but there's rampant anxiety. There's struggles with depression. There's body dysmorphia. There's all kinds of things going on in my family circle. I choose not to medicate at this time. There have been a couple of times where I thought, well, maybe I need something temporarily. There's nothing wrong with medication. I choose to deal with mine naturally because I have learned that I can. However, mine on a severity level, unless I had actually been seen by a therapist while I was experiencing the height of my social anxiety, on a severity level, more than likely, I wouldn't have been rated severe enough on anything I was experiencing to need medication, because it was much more functional and something that wasn't necessarily impeding in basic function most of the time. And that's usually the difference. So there's nothing wrong with medication, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that there may be family heritability in your mental health issues, but know that there are ways to manage and ways to do better, regardless of whether yours is genetic, environmental, and or biological. It's usually a combination of all of those things, and at some point it becomes a perfect storm where you now have a mental health struggle or a mental health condition. And I'm not talking about a little bit of sadness for a week or two, or a little bit of anxiety because you're about to take a test. I'm talking about true mental health struggles. We're going to talk about that more here in the next few weeks. So, again, I advocate because I know the signs, and there's a whole lot of us still not talking. This is not a trend. It is a vital part of who I am, and I have to honor that journey, because if it was not for, I've had so many people approach about this Wellness Wednesday, and if you're here watching, it's because at some point it's touched you, unless you just stumbled on it, and there's something that you've learned either about yourself or about me or about other people or people in general. There's something that you've learned that has made you want to come back and watch this again. And that's super important, and we have to honor that journey about what's gotten me or you or whatever to the point where we can share our story. I have a loved one who was in a very abusive relationship, and just about, 6 months to a year ago, they started sharing part of their story. Are they feeling like they can share the whole thing yet? No. But that part that they did share, I was so proud, because there were so many people out there that probably needed to read that on Facebook in that moment about the importance of getting out, protecting yourself, things like that. So that's part of what you can do to advocate, and that's kind of where I'm going here. If you are struggling with mental health, or you have struggled with mental health, I'm not going to say you're obligated to, because you're not. You can choose, but know that sharing your story, you don't have to pretend everything is fine to be accepted, and sharing your story very likely will help someone else. I know that sharing mine has helped other people. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. You wouldn't look at me in a jacket dressed up for work in a blazer or right now and think this girl has some serious mental health struggles. You would never think that. That's because it doesn't discriminate. I am the face of mental illness. A lot of us are the face of mental illness, and you never ever really know what you're standing next to or how much that person is struggling. So how can you advocate? What can you do differently to help yourself or to help someone else? Well, you can talk about it like we're doing right now. We can normalize mental health struggles by talking about them more, but talk about them correctly. And I'll touch on that in just a minute too. Talk about them correctly. If you don't know that somebody is diagnosed, you should not use words like they're bipolar, their anxiety's through the roof. If you don't know the signs and you don't know that they're diagnosed, you should never assume whatever it is that they have going on. we need to talk about it. We need to use accurate language when we do it. And a lot of times that's why it's better to share our own story, because someone may be able to identify with what we've been through. My computer's trying to go to sleep. With what we've been through without having to be like, hey, you have high anxiety because you're making me nuts. That's not, we need to talk about it, but we need to normalize it and we need to use accurate language. And like I said, we'll talk about this more in the next few weeks. We can wear green. Green is the color for mental health. You will see me in green a lot this month because there's various things going on, and I believe in mental health, and I wear green for mental health. So you can wear green as awareness, but it's so much more than that. You can share resources. Here on a local level, we have some amazing resources with NAMI Citrus, with Lifestream services, with Club Recovery, who does a lot of 12-step type programming. Those are some local ones. In fact, NAMI, if you're local, NAMI Citrus is having an awareness meeting next Tuesday. I'll drop that in the comments as well, where we're going to have an opportunity to hear directly from Lifestream about all of their services and programs. So if you've wondered what Lifestream is, what they do, they are one of our biggest mental health providers, if not the biggest in the county. So that's worth coming to. It doesn't cost anything. It starts at 6:30 at night. You can get dinner and get over there in time. And it's going to be in Hernando at the Club Recovery Old Schoolhouse. So, but if you're not local, NAMI is still a fantastic resource. You can use the NAMI National site, or you, again, can find an affiliate near you. Usually all NAMI pages have some kind of list of resources local that can connect you to local counseling agencies, behavioral health, stuff like that. So share resources. That's super important. The 988 suicide and crisis line. All you have to do is text 988 or call 988. And if you are a veteran, there's special part of that services that are veteran specific. You can just hit 1 when you call 988 and hit 1. It'll take you to the veterans section. There are articles. NAMI's going to be posting articles. Mental Health America is posting articles. There are articles you can read and share. And for teens, you can text friend to 62640. I'm going to put all this in the comments. But teens can text friend to 62640 and find someone to talk to. So there are resources out there, and there's tons of them if you really start looking around. But use knowledgeable and, what's the word I'm looking for? Verifiable resources like NAMI, like Mental Health America, like the government websites. When it comes to mental health, make sure you're using verifiable websites. You can support mental health nonprofits. That's another thing that you can do. Donate, volunteer, attend meetings like the awareness meeting that NAMI's having. Sign up for the QPR suicide prevention class that NAMI Citrus is having on the 16th. You can volunteer for some of these events, things like NAMI walks. Wherever you are, there's probably a walk going on somewhere near you in the near future. So there's lots of ways to support nonprofits that focus on mental health and mental health programs. And most importantly, if you know somebody's struggling, talk to them, have a conversation, check on them. And let them know they're not alone. And also know if you're the one that's struggling, that you are not alone either. There is help out there. There is someone that can at least listen. And you don't have to be afraid of judgment. There's plenty of non-judgmental space available for everyone. You're not alone. We are not alone. So those are things that you can do to start moving the needle forward on mental health and mental health awareness. Because let's face it, if you'll go to the doctor for a stomach ache, for a sore knee, for a pulled muscle, why is it not okay? Why do we think it's not? Because it is okay. Why do we think it's not okay to go to the doctor when something's going on up here? It's no different than a cold or the flu, or some type of chronic illness like diabetes, blood pressure. If you need help, you need help. And there are doctors specifically for that. And you don't have to feel some type of way about it because you're worried about others judging you. First of all, how much of that you disclose is up to you. But more importantly, the more you share your story and your experience, the more likely you are to inspire someone else to seek help or share theirs to help others seek help. And that is why mental health matters. And that's why it's more than a movement, because even though the month of May may focus super hard on mental health, and we have World Mental Health Day, which is like, I think in October, and then we have Suicide Awareness Day. We have all these things, but these should be everyday things. Should be things, if we know somebody's struggling or see that they're struggling, we should offer a hand up. We should check in on them and say, hey, you seem like you're struggling. Do you want to talk? And then you can kind of go from there and be like, you know what? I hear you. I see that you're struggling. Here's some great resources for you. This is, you know what I mean? I'm happy to listen, but that's all I can do. But here's some resources where you can get some further attention. So check on someone. Like I said, another thing you can do is you can learn. The more you learn about mental health and mental illnesses and the proper languages to use, to make sure that you're not inadvertently judging someone by calling them bipolar because they had a mood swing, the more important that is. So the more you know, the more you can share your knowledge. And that also means also stepping up. The more you know, the more likely you are to step up if you see somebody using the wrong language or judging someone because of a mental health struggle. You can also do things to boost your own wellness. And like I said, in terms of like the medication versus, it doesn't matter if you're on medication or not. You can still do better things with your diet, exercise more, and do mindfulness, self-care things that will help boost your mental wellness, regardless of whether it's genetic, or it's not always just genetic, regardless of whether there's a genetic component, whether you're on medication or not. These simple things like taking better care of your body, eating better, more whole foods, more balanced diets, getting daily exercise, those things can improve your wellness, period. Doesn't matter what else you're doing. Those things are processes that can augment almost anything, whether it's a medical condition, a mental condition, whatever it is. Doing those things can augment just about anything else you're doing, whether it's therapy, medication. Ignoring it, hoping it'll go away, not a good process, by the way, not a good method. The more you boost your wellness and the more you lead by example when you do that, by boosting your wellness and sharing your story, the more you are doing for other people who need to be inspired against that stigma, to break that stigma, all of those things. And of course, like I said, the most important thing is to let those who are struggling know that they're not alone. Because no matter how much you tell us that, when we're in the throes of the dark hole, whatever that looks like, we think we're the only one that understands what we're going through. We don't think anybody else understands. So the more people know that they're not alone, the more likely they are to seek help and to open up, and stop trying to struggle alone. And the more that you know you are not alone, same thing. So that's why mental health is so stinking important. Why it's more than a hashtag. It's more than a trend. It's an everyday thing. It's super personal for me. And I'm willing to bet that if it's not super personal for you, you know someone that it is personal for. Good morning, Michelle. So I'm wrapping up now. So Michelle, make sure if you get a chance to go back. This one's been a little bit long, but it's because mental health. So I want you to remember these things. Behavior patterns, lifetime familiar patterns, they can and should be interrupted. Just because it's something that was a learned behavior that was passed down through family doesn't mean you can't break that cycle. Healing and recovery, those things are not linear. You are going to go 5 steps forward and then 10 steps back. And that is okay. It is your own pace. It is your own journey. It's not going to look the same for anyone. But there are enough similarities that you can pick up tips and tricks from other people. But just remember, it's not linear. I get frustrated when I go backwards because I'm like, Donna, you've been doing this for so long. You talk about this with other people. You know what to do. What is your problem? The problem is that it's recovery, not recovered. And so I still, if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not being vigilant, if I get into this, I've got it under control type of attitude, I slip. And sometimes my thought patterns revert back, or sometimes my diet goes to crap, and then I feel things start happening. There's a tremendous impact there, I promise you. So healing and recovery, they're not linear. Give yourself grace, because you are going to have backwards moments. You just are. You're going to go backwards. But as time goes on and the more you practice, the more likely those moments will be shorter and fewer in between, like I talked about with my depression. Never ever assume. I want to remind you, it's really important to never ever assume. And you know those memes, we see them all the time. Be nice, you never know what the person next to you is experiencing. That's absolutely stinking true. Because again, mental illness doesn't discriminate. If you saw me looking at you like this in the store, the last thing you would think is that I have a mental illness, right? Now, if I'm looking at you like this, you might, but seriously, it's just not something because of the way I speak and because of the way I look most of the time that you would attribute. So remember, I am a face of mental illness. Many of us are faces of mental illness, and you should never, ever, ever assume, what the person next to you is experiencing. Part of the problem with the mental health stigma is that we can't always see or touch it. You can see a broken leg. The doctors can open you up and see a blocked artery, a heart, whatever, there's tests. You can't always see a mental illness. And that's part of our problem because we are afraid of what we can't see. And that's what lends to the stigma that is still rampant, even in this day and age, as people are starting to talk more about mental health and mental illness. So again, you'll go to the doctor, but why is it not okay to go to the doctor for that? So never ever assume, no matter who you're standing next to, you have no idea what they may be going through. Smiling depression is a thing. Functional anxiety and depression are a thing. Some people look extra organized when it's really much more than that. Most importantly, and the final thought I'm going to leave this with you with again, because I can't say it enough, is share your story. Tell your story. Even if you can only stomach telling part of it because it's still very emotional or it's still, you can't tell it without crying. You guys have seen me tear up here. You've seen me tear up when I've been talking about this. Find the part of your story that you can tell. It's okay to be emotional about it, but a lot of times we can't talk about it until we've healed a little bit better. And supposedly, the fact that you can tell your story without crying means you've healed, and I totally disagree with that. But you tell the part of your story that you can handle telling, because I promise you there's somebody else out there that needs to hear it. There's someone out there that needs to hear it. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. You never know who it might help if you tell your story. The next few weeks, last year for Mental Health Awareness, that was a year ago, I talked about the misconceptions of several major mental health conditions. We talked about language. We talked about how people misunderstand those mental health conditions and speak of them incorrectly. And there was one whole episode where I talked about 5 or 6 different disorders and how we tend to misuse the names of those disorders. Hey, Miss Carla. So the next few weeks, there's going to be a mini series. It's going to be a mini series. And we're going to do a deeper dive into each one of those disorders so that you know more. Because if we're going to say that mental health advocacy and awareness means learning more, then that's what we need to do, right? So all those that I mentioned last May, and I'm gonna find a way to get that video to you because I think it's still showing on Facebook for a little bit longer. I'll drop that in the comments too, but I'm gonna break down some of those individual disorders so that you do know a little bit more about them and why it's important not to tell somebody that's having a little bit of a mood swing that they're bipolar and things like that. So that's what we're looking at for the next few weeks. I hope you found this helpful in some way, inspiring in some way, and I hope you join us for the Mental Health Misconceptions mini-series that's starting next week. If you found this helpful or think someone else will, please share. Maybe that's part of telling your story. And if you don't feel like you have a story to tell or you're not ready, then you can share mine by sharing this video. In the meantime, I hope you all have a fabulous week. Wear green, celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month. Watch for the things I'm going to drop in the comments. And as always, until next week, be well.